Foreshadowing in yoga sequencing. Hi, if we haven't met yet, my name is Juliana Larochelle. I'm an experienced yoga teacher, yoga mentor, and I lead 300-hour yoga teacher training programs. In this video, I'll be talking about what is exactly foreshadowing in yoga sequencing. You probably heard it all over social media, and you're probably wondering, what is it? How do I do it? And I will break that down in this video. What is foreshadowing in yoga sequencing? This is where you prepare your students for where you're going later in class. I generally like to use the word prepare instead of foreshadowing because foreshadowing might be trending right now, but intelligent sequencing has always been about preparing your students for where you're going. How do you foreshadow? You introduce more accessible variations of your peak pose, peak flow, or peak transition earlier in class so that by the time you get to your apex of the flow, your students are warmed up and prepared to practice it safely. 5 steps to foreshadowing. Step number 1, pick what style of class you are teaching. Step number 2, pick what sequencing method you are going to use. Step number 3, decide the apex of your flow or the peak moment of your flow. Step number 4, list out all of the ways to prepare your students for that apex. And step number 5, build your class. What style of class are you teaching? Are you teaching gentle yoga, beginner yoga, all levels, slow flow, vinyasa flow, power yoga? Each style of class has a different intention, ideal yoga student, and class format. So I like to give distinctions to these class styles, and they can be broken down into poses, pace of class, transitions, hold time of poses, themes, use of Sanskrit, and music. If you want a full breakdown of each class style, check out my video Sequencing 101 linked in the description down below. What sequencing method are you going to use? A peak pose, a peak yoga flow, or a peak transition? Peak pose is a method of sequencing where the class builds up to a peak pose or the most challenging pose taught in class. Peak yoga flow is a method of yoga sequencing where the class builds up to a complex sequence that is typically between 7 and 10 poses long and incorporates a creative element. Peak transition is a method of sequencing where the class builds up towards a creative way of linking 2 poses together. Decide the apex of your flow. What will be the peak moment of your sequence that everything is building up to? So what is your peak pose? What is your peak flow? What is your peak transition? List out all of the ways to prepare your students for that apex or peak moment. So this is where I like to brain dump all of the ways to prepare your students for that peak moment. When you're using the peak pose method, I like to list out the 3 key muscles needed to be stretched or strengthened in order to do the pose safely, brain dump all of those poses that work that key muscle, list out all of the more accessible variations of the pose. For the peak flow, I like to think about what is the more accessible variation of this flow, and for the peak transition, what is the more accessible variation of this transition? And I put all of those things in class before I actually teach the peak pose, peak flow, or peak transition. Build your class. Your brain dump is your guide on what to incorporate into your class in order to prepare your students for your peak moment. Build your class and incorporate ways to prepare your students before your peak moment. If you need sequencing templates in order to build your class, I offer free sequencing templates in my yoga video, Sequencing 101. The link for that is in the description down below. Here's an example we can do together. Let's do a peak pose method for a beginner yoga class with a peak pose of tree. So the 3 key muscles, hips, glutes, inner thigh, groin. So here is my list of my brain dump of all of the poses that work the hips, glutes, inner thigh, groin that are appropriate for me to actually put in a beginner yoga class. I'll pause it for a moment so that you can read it. Next, I like to brain dump all of the different ways that I can do tree. So I could do a seated tree, recline tree, sideways tree, sphinx tree, forward fold tree. And now I like to brain dump the tree progression. So I call the first progression baby tree, where the foot comes to the ankle, then foot to calf and hands at heart center, and then foot to thigh and arms reach up. To learn how to fully sequence a beginner yoga class that prepares your students for where you're going, check out this YouTube video, Yoga Class Plan Example Beginner Yoga. It'll be linked in the description down below. Here's a peak flow example for an all levels class, where the peak flow is tree, high lunge, open arm twist, warrior two, extended side angle, half moon, reverse warrior, warrior two, downward dog. To prepare my students for the peak flow, I would teach this more accessible version first. Baby tree, low lunge, open arm twist, mini warrior two, mini extended side angle, side plank with the knee down and top leg lifted, mini reverse warrior, mini warrior two, tabletop. Peak transition example. This will be for a flow class. The peak transition will be pigeon to half moon. And the more accessible variations are pigeon to leg swings, pigeon to warrior two, pigeon to half moon with a block. I would put those more accessible versions in my sequence before I taught that peak transition in my main yoga flow in order to prepare my students for that peak transition. Yoga teachers, let me know, was this helpful? What was your biggest takeaway from this video? Please let me know in the comment section down below.